Malicious Compliance, where the genie really is malicious. Our first post is by Gringelly. I have to claim mileage from the office and not my home? Alright. I seen a few travel ones today and was reminded of this. I used to be sent out on training a few times a year and I could claim mileage at a set rate per mile. At the time, most people working at this place lived in a town 5 miles north of the office, and training tended to be in a large city about 60 miles south of the office. At the time where I lived between the office and the city, so 30 miles south of the office. 30 miles north of the city is where training was, so I was only claiming 60 miles expenses for every trip, home, city, home, rather than 120 miles, office, city, office. So finance went on a cost-saving drive and announced that we had to claim mileage office, city, office, with the reasoning being that the majority of staff who lived 5 miles north could have been paying for their own fuel to get to the office, so they shouldn't be claiming those extra 5 miles times 2 on a training day. I understood the reasoning for it, but assumed that I was so far south they'd still accept a 60-mile claim from me. Boy, was I wrong, and I was completely reamed out the next time I put in a claim, despite pointing out that I was saving them money. I was accused of trying to defraud the company. I was told to redo my claim sheet and they wouldn't put a formal warning on my employee file this time. So instead of taking it higher, I was now being paid double in mileage and saving 60 miles of fuel on not driving to the office on training days. I complied. A few days later, my boss wasn't in, so I had to get her boss to sign my travel expenses. He asked why I was claiming office, city, office when I lived so much closer. I explained what had happened and he was pissed, but signed it and told me he'll take it to finance for me as he was heading that way. The policy amendment was emailed out to all staff later that day, stating that on training days we were to claim either home, city, home, or office, home, office, whichever was shorter. Ah well, the extra money was nice when I got it. Seriously, what are people thinking sometimes? Yeah. Our next post is by Reen Becker. How to organize creative, fun staff meetings. Due to the positive response on my first story here causing a stir at an international organization, whereas I'd like to share another one. In the early teens of this century, I was the chief information officer of a large organization in my country. As a result of my problem-solving skills, the managing director, let's call him Paul, once in a while added problematic department to my responsibilities. I even ran the communication department for a while. My star within the organization was rising, and at a certain moment I was informed that I would get a new office right next to Paul for easy access. I also struck up a good working relationship with the Chief Human Resources, Harry, and one of the senior directors, Pete. Petey? We were regularly huddled in a so-called working meetings where we would drink coffee, discuss work, life, and watch hilarious YouTube videos. One of the topics that regularly came up was the meeting room situation. The board had decided that in the meeting rooms were outsourced to a third party to rent out, and the third party paid a monthly fee. However, the third party charged us as well, so every time we wanted a staff meeting, we had to pay for the pleasure. This was a regular pet peeve, as every extra would cost money. The coffee on every floor was free of charge except in the meeting rooms. The big supporter of this was our chief financial officer, Mark, who was much hated by all. He would check everyone's spending line by line and would hammer you on every mistake. But if his department made a mistake, he sent an email along the lines of, "Mistakes will be made. Deal with it." He had zero friends within the organization. One of the management meetings, Mark went off on a totally off-topic rant about concerning financial waste, much sighing and irritated looks from all around. Paul, being aware that we disliked Mark, did defend him by saying we should cut back on spending and look at cheaper alternatives for everything. All of us concurred. We just wanted Mark to shut up. After the meeting, Harry and Pete walked up to me to go for lunch, so we did. Harry started to say he got an idea. He explained it over lunch. Our eyes twinkled of sheer maliciousness. Pete would talk to Paul to get him to agree on principle without explaining the details, and we'll execute our plans. A day later, Pete passed by my office and, broadly smiling, just said, "We have a go." And thus the wheels were set in motion. I write a mail to my department that the next staff meeting will be held in a nice bar next to the lake, and that drinks and snacks will be on the company. First, we will have a staff meeting, which I hope we can keep to the bare essentials, and afterwards it's free for all. Prospects are it would be sunny, so bring sunscreen and sunglasses. Airbeds and beach balls are obligatory. Office dress is voluntary. If people want to swim afterwards, that's their choice. The positive reaction from employees are overwhelming. Harry has done it in his department as well. The same result. In the next few days, a vibe goes through the departments. People are happy, motivated, and seem to be a bit giddy. The day arrives, sitting on a beach under a warm sun, with cold drinks in hand, because we're not barbarians. My staff and I work through the staff meeting in record time. All department heads have prepared written reports and distribute them via mail in advance. The only thing I do is comments, no comments, next item. The rest of the afternoon is seen grown-up people behave like kids, splashing water all over the place, sunbathing, and enjoying a wine or beer. 2 days later, I am called in Mark's office. I walk in, doing my best impression of a saint, filled the air with a holy innocence. A vein on his beet red head is bulging. I position myself strategically at the meeting table so I can duck when his head explodes. "What the heck is this?" He throws down the bill for the staff meeting. I glance at it. €800, or there were about 30-odd people. Drinks, snacks, and a rental of some beach beds, well within limits. That's my bill for a staff meeting. "That's not a staff meeting. That's a staff outing. That should be authorized by bill with a budget." "No, that is a staff meeting. I'd like to remind you that how and when I conduct my staff meetings is my sole responsibility. Furthermore, you emphasized in our last management meeting that we need to cut back on costs and look for alternatives." So I did. "Let me ask you, if I rent a meeting room for 30 plus people, half a day with coffee and tea, a projection screen, access to a network, and a projector, how much does that come to?" He does some quick calculations and comes to a roughly €1,200. With an angelic face, I look at him. "So, I saved about €400. Now, what exactly is the problem?" The way he contorts his face makes me fear we will need to get an ambulance. "The meeting room rental is a source of income for us. We must support them. I will not stand for this. We are seeing Paul right now." "Sure, whatever floats your boat." So off we go and march into Paul's office, where Mark explains the whole affair while I keep looking innocent. Paul let me explain my side of the story, and I reference the calculation. Paul smiles. "In my opinion, a very creative way to cut costs and enhance morale. I wish more people would think this way, and may I remind you, Mark, that it was you yourself who said that we should look at everything. Maybe you should try it as well." With those words, he makes a subtle gesture we all know means you're dismissed. As we make our way out of the office, Paul calls me back. "Oh, can you stay here for a minute?" and close the door. "I would like to discuss something with you." So I close the door and sit down. Of course, Pete had already briefed me, and I personally signed off on it. As I really think it is creative and hilarious, I'll allow it, as it has been a positive effect on employees. However, don't force Mark to have a heart attack. He's a bit of an. I know, but he's also good at his work. "So, you don't mind if we yank his chain once in a while?" "Yank away. Maybe he'll loosen up." "Well, you know that Harry has done the same." "I know. I'm looking forward to the tantrum with the bulging vein already." And he chuckles. It was the exact moment some pretty salty language makes its way through the door, and about as dry as a martini, Paul says, "I think Harry's staff meeting bill has turned up." From that moment on, Paul became a regular participant in our working meetings. Our staff meetings became pretty well visited after that, with a soundtrack of the gnashing of teeth of one certain colleague. That was, oh my, improving employee morale? Gee, that is one epic way to have a meeting. Dang. Is by Helix1322. My dad brought a snake to school because his teacher told him to. My dad had a great show and tell story. He got a big gardener snake, and it was about 3 feet long from his telling. and was telling all his friends about it. The teacher told him to stop lying, and he told her he wasn't lying. She said, "Then, fine, bring it in." Oh no, oh no. My dad packed up this gardener steak in an old big jar, but it broke on the way to school. He walks into class with this big snake in his hand. The teacher freaks out and jumps on her desk and is terrified of it. She sends him to the principal office. The principal was also a woman who wouldn't let him because he was holding a big gardener snake. The principal called his mother, who has simply responded with, "Why did the teacher want him to bring it in then?" You end up getting the day off and didn't get in any other trouble from it. I'm being told that there are garter snakes, but we call them gardener snakes. Also, this took place in the early 60s, so I feel women are more afraid of snakes and creepy crawlies back. Okay. I don't know if that's true, but hey. I don't want to assume anything. Our next post is by Crinks. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce that. Follow her work schedule then. I used to be an intern at a bank while I was pursuing my diploma, and on paper, the working hours were supposedly your typical 9 to 6. That's typical? Where do you live? Anyways, but OP usually came late and but people usually came late and stayed late, or came early and stayed late. There was a colleague of mine, Denise, who had to come all the way from Malaysia every morning just to get to work in Singapore. Ah, that makes sense. There was an unofficial agreement with her boss that she was allowed to enter the office at any time, since she was never sure what time she could reach her workplace depending on the traffic. This is fine, since she usually reached at 12 p.m. and stayed until at least 8 p.m., just like everyone else. And staying past 11 a.m. was the norm here. 11 p.m., my bad. Just like most people, her day can't start without a cup of coffee, and she would get one no matter what time she reached. No one had any issues with her coming in late until another intern came. Let's call her Jane. Now, Jane was the type of person who hated coming to work early and loved to go home the moment the clock hit 6. I mean, to be fair, who doesn't? Honestly, so do we, but we don't do it. Oh wait, did I just repeat myself? Okay. She loved to gossip with her other colleagues and friends, as well as getting to work at 10 a.m. without any valid reason, and with a layer of makeup so thick you could probably slap her and leave a handprint. Other colleagues had already submitted multiple complaints regarding her coming to work late, and her manager was already pissed and sent Jane an email. She was not to come to work late anymore, or her internship will be considered null and void, along with a mention to her supervisor that she would fail that semester as our internship was graded. All of us were on a Teams meeting when she received that email, which led to her outburst. "Manager, why can Denise come late but I can't? Just because she's a full-time employee doesn't mean she doesn't have to follow the rules." All right, in that case, you get to follow her work schedule then. Okay, sure. At this point, all of us were amused but horrified by what was entailed, because as interns, we had to send a morning report to our school from our work email at 11 a.m. sharp in the morning with no exceptions. Imagine her surprise when she remembered this the next day and even took a taxi down to rush her report and tried to leave work at 6. But this was reminded by the manager she could only leave at 11 p.m. It didn't take long for her to realize that when the manager said to follow Denise's work schedule, she meant the staying late part as well. This meant that Jane had to report work from 10:45 and could only leave when Denise does, at 11 p.m. Heck, I'll never forget her face when she panicked and tried to call up our manager, but was denied resuming her previous working hours as per the verbal agreement which everyone heard before. This continued for roughly a week, with Jane looking warier and warier as time went by, from coming in an hour later, but not only being able to leave work 5 hours later. Thankfully, she apologized by then, and her manager was nice enough to let her resume with actual working hours. Throughout the rest of my time there as an intern, she was always punctual and even worked late sometimes. I left before Jane did, and she did eventually become a better person, didn't gossip as much, and was a lot more well-mannered. We added each other on Insta and kept in touch. I have a lot more stories of my slightly chaotic life that I'm more happy to share with y'all. Just let me know. I apologize for those who are curious to why I described her makeup like so. It was just what irked me back then. Okay, I think too many people are becoming mistaken about the working hours. Maybe I should have stated more clearly that it was normal for people to stay past 6 till 8 till 11 p.m., not always till 11 p.m. Ooh, I love this malicious compliance. Wow. Should have probably said James' name was Karen. Anyways, yeah. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and peace out.